welcome to this week's episode. Today I want to dig a little bit more deeply into all issues surrounding testosterone and also a little bit of the backstory about how it all got a little bit muddled, and frankly, a lot of it doesn't really make sense. So I think it's just good to know where we're starting from, and I'm just going to present to you just pure scientific information and you can make your own decisions. But let's just go back to talking about testosterone as far as how it applies to women. So as you know, because we've talked about it many times, when we go through puberty, our ovaries start producing three critical hormones. Estradiol, which is the primary estrogen that we produce. Now, yes, there are two other estrogens that we produce, but I'm just going to ignore those for now because they are not the primary ones that are responsible for all the symptoms that we talk about regarding menopause. And then progesterone, which is the hormone that we make in huge quantities after ovulation to protect the little fetus should we get pregnant. And then if we get pregnant, we produce progesterone in massive amounts throughout pregnancy, later coming from the placenta. And then what about testosterone? Well, we've been making testosterone in huge quantities ever since we went through puberty. It's quite commonly stated now, and this is true, that women make way more testosterone than estradiol throughout our lives. And the reason why that's confusing is simply because the units of measurement are different. So if you look at a number on a piece of paper, for example, and see that your estradiol is 100, and your testosterone is, say, 20, one might think your testosterone's much lower. But because of the units of measurement, you actually have to multiply the testosterone number by 10 to get an apples-to-apples comparison. Because testosterone is measured in a particular unit called nanograms per deciliter, and estradiol is measured in a different unit called picograms per milliliter. And who cares about that except that there's a 10-to-1 conversion. So yes, we've had testosterone all our lives, and isn't it interesting, actually more than estradiol. Now, that being said, we make about 10 times less than men, so no one's suggesting that we want to have the same testosterone levels as a man. But as we go through the process of perimenopause and menopause, we lose all three of those hormones, right? So at some point, we're producing pretty much zero of all three. And interestingly, testosterone often drops before the other two. So in my case, as is the case for many of my patients, my testosterone was undetectable, like the lab said zero, or at least below the level at which they could find any in my blood, when I was 45. Now, I still had some estrogen and progesterone, even though those were declining, but when testosterone drops to zero or close to it, boy, do we feel it. And what do you think we feel? Well, all the things you would imagine, like decreased sex drive, loss of muscle mass, loss of energy. In the background, our bone health is starting to suffer. So these are important things for quality of life, not only for feeling good, but also for reducing diseases later in life. We also know that testosterone has not been shown to increase the risk of any cancers. There's been a lot of controversy about that over the years, but the way that it's given now in a not by mouth form, just like with estrogen, when you take it by mouth, it causes an increased risk in blood clotting. It can affect our liver. So yes, we don't want to do that. But when testosterone's given in a not by mouth form, really we don't see any of those issues. So all of the previous concerns from the past about testosterone being in somehow dangerous or bad for you or all of these things really have been mitigated by the new way that it's delivered. So bioidentical testosterone delivered in a non-oral form does not cause any form of cancer. There's lots of controversy in the world of prostate cancer. That's been asked and answered. Does not cause prostate cancer. Does not cause breast cancer. In fact, it might very well reduce the incidence of breast cancer. There's a lot of ongoing studies suggesting that's probably going to become true as we learn more, as well as all the other things I mentioned as quality of life things. So let's think about it. If our testosterone drops to zero, right, none. Imagine if that happened to a man. So I'm always thinking about, what would men do in this situation? Because we all know that there are vastly more money and research dollars and time spent on helping men's sexual health compared to women's. So just think about the average man. He might lose, say, 50% of his testosterone from age 30 to 50. Let's just say he went from a level of 1,000 to 500. That would be pretty typical. And he might start feeling pretty crummy. Well, guess what? He might feel all those same things. Decreased sex drive, erectile dysfunction, gaining fat around the middle, losing muscle mass, having decreased energy. And that was recognized as a problem that was big enough to solve. So there are multiple testosterone products available at the pharmacy to help men with this. They are FDA approved. They actually come in 6 different categories. They have so many options. Within those 6, there are multiple different choices. So probably 15 to 18 different choices if you add them all up. They have a testosterone patch. They even have a pellet. They have a nasal spray. They have a gel. They have a solution. They've got lots of different ways to get this in their system, and they're all FDA approved, so you can get them at your local pharmacy. Now, the FDA approved those for a condition that they call hypogonadism. Well, that means low testicular function. Well, guess what menopause is? Talk about hypogonadism. Our ovaries are making no hormones. I mean, you couldn't come up with a better description of hypogonadism, right? So, I mean, for goodness sake, it's so curious how we are considered differently than men. And sometimes I'll have a couple come into my office and the husband or partner is like so confused and it's like, Dr. Susan, what is wrong with my wife? And maybe she has an estrogen and testosterone of 0. And I might say to him, well, if I cut your testicles off and your testosterone went from 500, which it is now, and that's still low compared to what it used to be, to 0 in a very short time, how would you feel? And immediately he can understand, oh yes, that's why she's having all those things. Low sex drive, fat around the middle, losing muscle mass, losing energy, all of the things that we would have when our testosterone is obliterated. So quite curious that the FDA approved multiple products for men to use to treat this very important problem. Now, not to make light of it, men should take testosterone. It's very beneficial for them. It does help them to feel better. It absolutely helps with sexual function, not gaining weight around the middle, having energy, helping with bone health, helping with muscle mass. But how come they get that and we don't? So at the current moment, we have exactly 0 testosterone products that have been approved by the FDA. Now, there's this really curious story. Back in 2004, so almost 20 years ago, one of the big drug companies, Procter & Gamble, produced a testosterone patch for women. It was at a very good dose, an appropriate dose for women, not too high, and I'm going to talk about that because we do not want testosterone levels too high. They had studies to back up that it improved sex drive. So the main point that they were presenting it for was to improve sex drive, and every study, every good one anyway, that's ever been done looking at sex drive for women taking testosterone in the appropriate amounts for women shows that testosterone works better than the placebo arm of the study. Now, does it work for everybody? No, but it works for a great number of people. So we know that taking testosterone, replacing that which we've lost, so we'll talk about that. We're not trying to create super physiologic levels, like crazy high levels that you've never had before. We're simply trying to replace what you had before. So when my testosterone was 0, and then I elevated back to the level that I had when I was, say, 30, I felt like my life had come back. I mean, talk about life-changing. And how can we come to an assumption that replacing a hormone that we've had our whole life could be harmful or dangerous? It makes no sense. So yet, in the no sense bucket, for men, they had no problem replacing multiple types of testosterone for men without regard to any of these so-called dangerous side effects that apparently happen to women. It really makes no sense. All right, so coming back to this story I was telling you back in 2004, Procter & Gamble went to the FDA with a patch for women in the appropriate dose for women with studies to back it up showing that improved sex drive. Well, the FDA did not approve it. And some of the reasons were they didn't know about long-term safety. We've had it all of our lives. Men had been getting it since the 1950s. Curious. Also stated that the benefit that women received as far as improving sex drive wasn't important enough to warrant a drug, as if our sex drive's not important enough to warrant help, whereas in the meantime, men were getting multiple testosterone products approved, as well as multiple products for erectile dysfunction. And I have no problem with that. I mean, that's fantastic, good for them. But who are they having sex with? I mean, if we've got all of our men in their 50s and 60s treating their erectile dysfunction, which is fabulous, let's do that. Replacing their low testosterone, which is fabulous, let's do that. So they're feeling fantastic. Meanwhile, we have no estrogen, no testosterone, no progesterone, vaginal dryness, no libido, gaining weight around the middle, being exhausted. So the last thing we want to do is engage in sexual activity. I mean, doesn't make any sense. So some things in science simply don't make sense. Now let me add to the not making sense-ness of all of this. Some drugs get pushed through the FDA very quickly, and usually they're the ones that the most vocal groups think are the most important, like Viagra, well known to have gotten pushed through that system faster than any other drug in the history of the world. Yet a bioidentical testosterone patch for women, which is a natural hormone that we've had all of our lives, did not make it through the gauntlet of the FDA. Now coming back around to do that again costs bajillions of money. You've got to do more studies. You've got to come back and present it again. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. So no wonder it takes a very big drug company who's very motivated to do it to even go down that road again. And once a drug's been turned down, you know, it's a very difficult process to fill in all of the little dots that they wanted checked. And more than likely, if those same people are still on the FDA committee at the time, they're going to have the same incorrect opinion. For example, one of the people who voted against it was a cardiologist who stated that he thought it was going to cause cardiovascular risk to women, which we know that it doesn't. That is just straight up uneducated. When it's given in a transdermal form, there is no cardiovascular risk. In fact, there are plenty of studies showing that testosterone for men and women improves cardiovascular health. So, believe it or not, there are people on the FDA that are not educated about hormones, especially about hormones for women, and this is what we're fighting against. So in the meantime, we need to keep advocating for ourselves and then using products that are safe, that are available from compounding pharmacies. Now, I mentioned there was some more intrigue. Now, there are 2 drugs that the FDA did approve later. So this was in 2014 and 2019. I mentioned this in a previous video about low sex drive. We have 2 drugs for women approved for what's called hypoactive sexual desire. Now, that term does not actually apply to postmenopausal women, but let's just say low sex drive. So both of these drugs are not approved for postmenopausal women because who cares about them? They're just old and don't have sex. I mean, frankly, that is truly the thought process there, I think. But for premenopausal women who have low sex drive, we have Addy, which I talked about, that was actually designed as an antidepressant. It has all kinds of side effects, just like antidepressants do. You have to take it every single day, even though you don't have sex every single day, and it has side effects every single day. So a handful of patients take it. I have none in my practice. I would love to know how many people take it throughout the country. Probably hardly any, because it doesn't work worth a darn. It has a ton of side effects, and it improves sex drive so little that it was barely better than placebo. And but they approved that, right? So the FDA approved that one, even though the list of side effects is as long as your arm. It's a chemical. It's not natural in any way compared to a natural hormone patch. I mean, just good Lord, makes no sense. And then a little bit later in 2019, Vyleesi, which I also mentioned in a previous video. This is an injection that you have to give yourself 45 minutes before you want to have sex. I mean, give me a break. so difficult, not spontaneous, and talk about not natural. You're injecting yourself with a chemical that acts on neurotransmitters in your brain, has a bunch of potential side effects. It works on the melanocortin receptors in your brain. Well, that was okay. The FDA had no problem with that one, and the benefits were minimal. Yet we know that testosterone, natural hormone, had it all our lives, in a dose appropriate for women, has been shown in many studies to improve sex drive, particularly for women who are postmenopausal, yet they didn't approve it. It's just really mind-blowing and quite curious and interesting. And you do not have to be a conspiracy theorist, because I certainly am not one. These are just facts. But here we are, so let's just face the reality of where we are and what are we going to do. Well, as you all know, I take all 3 hormones, because if we're taking hormone replacement, isn't the goal to replace what we had before? And guess what? What we had before was all 3, estradiol, progesterone, testosterone. And as you know, and so important to remember, testosterone has to be given in the appropriate doses for a female. I take testosterone. I do not have oily skin, acne, hair loss, clitoral enlargement, deepening of my voice. These are all things that can happen when testosterone is given in doses that are too high. So when we use a testosterone product, whether it's a cream, a patch, a pellet, an injection, anything that's not a pill, it's critical to measure your testosterone blood levels. So what we look for in our office now, and we've become more and more conservative over the years, and I can tell you have pretty much 0 side effects now, because we're looking for numbers about 80 to 100. And remember, with testosterone, we're looking at nanograms per deciliter, so that number. And we feel great, because that's the upper end of what females reach when they're younger. When we get numbers that are significantly over that, like over 150 or certainly over 200, we run into numerous side effects. So if your doctor is suggesting that your testosterone levels should be 250 or 300, no, please don't do that. You will have side effects. Women are not built to have testosterone levels that high, and we certainly have no idea what the long-term effects would be from that. However, I've had many patients come from elsewhere with levels in that range, and they do have everything I just mentioned, including some pretty serious stuff like clitoral enlargement or deepening of the voice, which might reverse a little bit, but is somewhat irreversible, not to mention acne, oily skin, hair growth, all the things we don't want. So yes, all 3 important, but let's be sensible. This is not a more is better situation at all. Hormones are critical to be in a very tightly managed range, which mimics what we had in the past. That is what we call hormone replacement. We're replacing it. We're not trying to give you a bucket more of something that you never had before, with this idea not proven by science that it might benefit you in some way. It does not. So yes, crazy, isn't it, how we've been so forgotten, especially menopausal women. Our problems are not that important, yet men our age have hundreds of options to help them with their sexual well-being. I just want to know who it is they think they're having sex with. I mean, we've got to be aligned. So yes, it's getting better. And we do prescribe testosterone, estradiol, progesterone. We give you lots of options. Now, I mentioned on this video many times in the past that I do use hormone pellets myself, but my dose is tiny. I get the littlest bitty pellet, and I feel great. You don't need to have a hormone pellet if that's not your preference. We can use testosterone in a cream. Well, it's sticky and messy. The absorption's a little bit more variable. You can also get little drops under your tongue. There's a little dissolving thing called a troche you can put inside your cheek. We can get it in your system and get you feeling better. In the meantime, while the FDA is trying to catch up with the reality that women are just as important as men, because that certainly isn't the way they've seen us so far, but we will get there, and we're making little progress at a time. So just some curious stories about testosterone, and I'm asked all the time, well, why isn't testosterone FDA approved? Doesn't that mean that it's bad? Well, the truth is no. It just means that the FDA hasn't got around to considering that women's sexual health is important enough for them to put their heads down and look at the studies that show that it is beneficial, because they're too busy passing drugs that have thousands of side effects and could kill you, but testosterone, the natural hormone, for some reason isn't important. So a lot of things in life don't make sense. This is one of them. I think it's really good to understand. And that way we can advocate for ourselves and know that we have to keep pushing to keep female health care as important as male. So that's my story about testosterone, and a little story about why we don't have an FDA-approved medication yet. Please subscribe, share it with your friends, and I can't wait to see you next week.